Hey there. Welcome to the Prevention Podcast, brought to you by the Rockbridge Area Community Services Board and the Rockbridge Area Prevention Coalition. I'm your host, Blake Sanchez, and on today's episode, I will be introducing you to Ridge CASA. Ridge CASA for Children is a nonprofit organization located in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, who advocates for children who have experienced abuse and/or neglect through recruitment, training, and supervision of community volunteers. Today, I am joined by Sherry McKinney-France, who is the CEO of Ridge CASA. Thanks for joining us today, Sherry.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Blake.
To get us started, Sherry, could you tell us a little bit more about the Ridge CASA program and the National CASA program as a whole?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the National CASA model started in 1977 in Seattle, Washington. There was a judge who recognized that he was making really huge decisions for kids and families, and that he was missing really important pieces of information. So he founded the CASA program then. And if you fast forward all these years, there are about 950 CASA programs nationally in 49 states. And we obviously are one of them. We were founded in 1994. So soon we'll have our 30th anniversary. We've served well over 1,000 children since that time. And our primary goal is to serve children who have been abused or neglected by them having a CASA.
When you say CASA, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it does mean house, but it does not mean house in this context. A CASA is a court-appointed special advocate. And what that means is it is a community volunteer. They are at least 21 years old. They do not need a special training or education or license. They are interviewed and pass a pretty extensive background check because, of course, we want to ensure kids are safe. And then they go through about 30 hours of classroom training. Then they're observing court hearings. And then they are actually inducted by a judge into the CASA program. And from that point on, they can be assigned a case. Our cases are assigned by the judges. We don't get to pick the cases. We certainly could request to be on a case, but we get a case because it has been assigned to us by a judge. And then that advocate has a lot of responsibilities and duties. And their primary one is really to get to know the child and all the people involved with the child, which means the birth parent, the foster parent, or the aunt, whomever is caring for the child, to see how they're doing in school, to see what their medical history is, and, do they have mental health needs and are they being met? And they work with all of these people, and then they pull all of the information together and they write a fabulous court report that are really treasured by the judges. And the judges then use that information to help them make decisions. When kids are in foster care, DSS has an attorney and parents have attorneys, and there's often, there's a guardian ad litem, but really the CASA is the voice of the child, and they are there representing the best interest of the child that they know well, that they visit at least monthly, once a month, and again, are in contact with all of those providers.
So if I'm understanding correctly, Sherry, the CASA advocates kind of serve as a liaison between the children and all of the different stakeholders in play. I know we talk about, the CASA advocates kind of form these special relationships with the child and the different stakeholders in order to help make the best decisions for the children. Generally, what types of issues are these advocates kind of having to deal with?
Mm-hmm. That's such a great question. And my famous, most professional answer, Blake, really is it depends, right? It depends on the child and the case, but certainly there are a lot of similarities. Many of the families that we are involved with, there is a history of mental health issues, drug and alcohol abuse. domestic violence, poverty. So, the one thing that is almost a guarantee, well, it is a guarantee, right? Is kids that are in foster care have experienced trauma.
Sure.
The fact that they've been removed from their home is traumatic within itself, right?
Exactly.
And I think that sometimes it's hard for us to understand, how that's possible, because we might look at a situation and say, oh my gosh, this poor child who endured this terrible situation. And all of that could be very accurate, but it's still home. And that's still your mom and your dad or your aunt or your grandma or whoever was caring for you. So being removed from that environment is in itself traumatic. So, our CASAs are absolutely working with kids and families who have experienced trauma. And so we do a lot of education for our CASAs on how to recognize what trauma is, what it looks like, and how it impacts kids. And we also, Blake, want to recognize that as a result of doing this work, our CASAs are experiencing trauma, right? We call that secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. So we also are really committed to helping our CASAs learn how to manage those kinds of emotions, because that's pretty big work.
For sure. If a child is in need of the services or of a CASA advocate, what is the process or the referral program? Is it directly through the court itself, or is it more through other organizations that can kind of get involved as well?
Well, it really depends on the court, because we serve currently, our footprint, Blake, is Harrisonburg, Rockingham, Stanton, Augusta, Waynesboro, Lexington, Rockbridge, Buena Vista. And all of those courts are different.
Sure.
The thing that is consistent, though, is that we must be appointed by the judge. Now, depending on the court and the relationships that we have with all of the players, we certainly can request that we are assigned a case, which means we may or may not be assigned. But, some of the courts will just automatically assign us a case, and then we get an email from the clerk that says, hey, the judge assigned you a case. And other courts, we're actually in the courthouse requesting to be assigned. So it really just depends on which court we're in. But again, the common thread is that we have to be appointed by the judge. We are an organization that is actually in the Virginia state statute. So that makes us a bit unique.
Wow, interesting. To kind of follow up on there, I know so CASAs have to be appointed by the court, but are there any eligibility requirements or anything like that, like for the families in order to have a CASA representative on their team?
No, not really. It's really just something, again, that the judge decides. And if he or she thinks that we would be beneficial, then he would just assign it.
Yeah. Awesome. Kind of transitioning slightly, I know that you kind of talked about how the CASAs are not necessarily licensed, or they don't have to be any type of clinicians or service providers or things like that. And it's more following a volunteer-based training module. And I was wondering if you can kind of talk about maybe into a little bit more detail, say if there's a listener out there who's interested in wanting to become a CASA, how they can kind of go through that process, or where they can begin.
I'm so glad you asked. We definitely need CASAs. If I could just say first, Blake, that we estimate there are at least, and this is a modest guess, there are at least 300 children in our current footprint who need a CASA. We are currently serving 80, I believe 89 of them. So I would strongly encourage anybody who's listening, who their ears perked up when they heard our conversation, you can jump on our website, blueridgecasa.org, and click the button that says volunteer or get more information. And really, it just starts with filling out a very, very basic questionnaire. And then there's an interview. And again, there's extensive background checks. And the training is really great. We talk about child abuse, we talk about trauma, we talk about different organizations. I believe you call them stakeholders, which is a great term. So I'll borrow that. We talk about all the stakeholders, what their roles are, their responsibilities. We talk a lot about the court report, how to write it. So the training is pretty extensive. It is all virtual right now. We've thought about pulling it back in person, but we found a way. My team is amazing, and they found a way to make our virtual training pretty robust, lots of breakouts. And so it is pretty interactive. And it culminates, with going to court and observing. So you kind of get a feel for what's going on. But we provide a ton of support. We do ask our CASAs to commit to at least 18 to 24 months, which is the typical life of a case. So you might have a CASA that's involved 9 months, but more typically, again, 18 to 24 months. It's really important that people realize that when children are in foster care, especially right now, the job market is so complicated. It is common for our kids that we are serving to have numerous social workers, to have multiple mental health providers, to not have to be placed in multiple foster homes. So you have a child who's 9 who hasn't had a consistent person in their life. Again, that's one of the reasons we ask for that commitment, because for a lot of the kids that we serve, that CASA is the only consistent person in like the life of their case. And that's so important, because every time a team member changes, information is lost.
Absolutely.
And so we want this CASA to be with the child from the very beginning to the very end of the process. So as far as a time commitment, I would say 8 to 10 hours a month, and that it's kind of a give or take. And typically, I would say that services are kind of front loaded. And what I mean by that is when you first get a case, there's a lot to do.
Sure.
Right? You're pulling reports and gathering information and reading a lot. But as the case goes on, typically it's less and less of a time commitment.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Generally, are CASAs only staffed on one individual case at a time, or are they sometimes balancing multiple cases at once?
Great question. Typically, it's one case, but one case could mean multiple children because of a sibling group.
Sure.
So one thing, we actually have a couple in Lexington that they work cases as a team, which I think is very cool. They have very different strengths. So if there is a couple out there that's listening, this is a great way to give back to your community. We also try to partner new CASAs with seasoned CASAs. So if we have a family that has 4 children, we wouldn't assign one advocate for kids. We might give a new advocate to and a seasoned advocate to, so that seasoned advocate can kind of mentor the new advocate. Again, we really try to provide a lot of support because, it's a big ask. We kind of think of our volunteers as, they're volunteers on steroids.
Sure.
They're really ready to roll up their sleeves and do something. And we have WNL students that are volunteers, and we have retired people who are volunteers. So really our volunteers run the gamut and are pretty diverse.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, Sherry, I'm just interested how you got involved with Blue Ridge CASA and what this organization kind of means to you.
Oh, well, I moved to this area, Blake, in 2020 from Ohio, where I led organizations that served children and families who had experienced very significant trauma. And that's what I've dedicated my career to, and that's really my passion. And when I saw this job posted, I looked at my partner and said, I just found my new job. And of course, he said, really? And I said, I did. And I read the job description to him, and he said, I think you're right. So this is very near and dear to my heart. My partner and I have been foster parents. Our son did not have a CASA, and I believe that would have changed the entire trajectory of his life. And so this is just work that is really near and dear to my heart and something I feel very passionate about. And I just feel really honored to be here and lead this work.
Absolutely. kind of looking forward, how do you see the current model of the Blue Ridge CASA kind of developing and growing? And then you said that there is an active need for more volunteers. Do you see that number unfortunately kind of seeming to grow? I'm kind of
Yes.
wondering maybe what the current challenges of your program are, and how you hope to kind of shape this program moving forward.
Yeah, such a great question. So when I think of Blue Ridge Casa Lake, I think of it as this three-legged stool. So one leg is the actual CASAs who do the work with the kids. And the other leg is the staff who supports the CASAs to be able to do that. And then the last leg is funding, right? We have to have money to pay the staff, to support the volunteers. And so my job really as a CEO is balancing that stool and then unbalancing it, right?
Sure.
Because we're going to grow. So things are going to be unbalanced and then balancing it. So right now the stool is pretty balanced. I will say though that there are a lot, again, 200 kids who need a CASA. So we actually have a class starting the end of February. That is full, but if anybody is interested, we have another class starting in April. The goal is to unbalance the stool by growing the number of CASAs, which will then grow the number of kids that we are serving. So that is our current push as an organization. Our goal is to serve 40% more children this year, which is huge. So we need more CASAs to be able to do that. So that's really our push right now is recruiting, screening, and training CASAs. And that's our primary goal. We're also going to be expanding our footprint, Blake. So we're going to be providing services next fiscal year, which starts in July.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be expanding to Shenandoah and Page counties. So we'll be serving 2 more localities.
Are there any other kind of more local CASA programs outside of here in the Shenandoah Valley, say in the Tidewater region of Virginia, or is it just kind of so far located in this region of the state?
There are 24 of us across the Commonwealth. So, I described our current footprint, and there are other programs that serve multiple counties, and then some that just serve one county, but there are 24 of us.
Awesome.
Yeah, I will also say if someone wanted to get involved in another way, like they're listening and they think, oh, I love your mission, but oh my gosh, I can't commit that much time.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to be kicking off a program that we're calling CASA Sidekicks. So if somebody had a couple of hours a month and they could come and help us stuff envelopes or roll t-shirts for our 5K or something like that, it would be more hands-on, not with the kids because of confidentiality, but work that would be really helpful for us. Sure. I would really encourage them again to get on our website. That's another way that people can get involved. We have a fundraiser coming up June 11th. It's in Harrisonburg, so it would be a drive from Lexington, but it's Top Chef Harrisonburg, and it is amazing. Such a fun night where we have local chefs come and prepare meals, and you get to taste, all the different tasty things that they make, and it's just a fabulous night. So people could certainly attend that, and then of course we're always incredibly grateful for donations.
Awesome. Definitely glad that you shared all of those events that the CASA program kind of takes part in outside of the primary kind of service volunteer model.
Well, fundraising is really important for us because it's about 65% of our budget.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah. So, a lot of people ask how we're funded, and, they're like, oh, do you get grants? We do. We receive grant funding, both state and federal dollars, and then of course local grants and donations. And we're just incredibly grateful for all of the support. We literally wouldn't be here without it. So this is a community effort.
For sure. Kind of going off of those lines, as you've been here for a couple of years now and kind of understanding and learning more about this community, wondering how outside of the primary service model, how Blue Ridge CASA as an organization kind of interacts within the greater community and other nonprofit organizations and things like that.
We have so many partners. Our child advocacy centers, we work with 2 different CACs. The child advocacy centers, certainly DSS organizations in our current footprint, guardian ad litems, mental health providers. It's a very broad base of stakeholders. I will just give a shout out to Project Horizon in Lexington. I met Judy probably 10 months ago. I've just been here almost a year, and I met with her pretty shortly after I arrived. And she's just this wonderful human. And Project Horizon is, holy cow, they do such amazing work. They're so forward thinking. And, she offered us office space, which was huge. And so we have a staff person, Emily Castle, that is housed there part-time, and she's part-time in Stanton. And so we're so grateful for community partners, especially in your community in Lexington, especially Project Horizon, who gave us that opportunity and is really helping us establish and build stronger connections and relationships there.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Just speaking from the prevention side, sometimes a lot of these issues kind of seem to be segmented, and they're very different from the other. However, I think it really takes a village, and it takes kind of all community partners and organizations working together in order to kind of address these, somewhat common goals in order to help improve our communities. Thank you so much, Sherry, for sharing all of your knowledge about Blue Ridge CASA as an organization. I'm just wondering if you have any final messages for our listeners out there who are listening to this episode today.
I do. I think it's so important for us to remember what an incredible opportunity we have and the impact that we can make. And, one thing that we didn't touch on, Blake, is information about childhood trauma. And there was a study called the ACEs study. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the ACEs study, I encourage anybody who doesn't know, just Google it. But what the ACEs study taught us is that what kids need to completely change their life is one person, one caring and consistent person. And so I just encourage all of your listeners, you can be that person and you can change a child's story.
Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Prevention Podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening to the story and experiences of one of our amazing community partners. We would love to hear your feedback on this series. Should you have any questions, comments, or recommendations about the direction of the series, you can reach us online at www.racsb.org/prevention or by email at prevention@racsb.org. As always, it has been a pleasure chatting with you today, and I look forward to serving you in the next episode.